Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ready, Set, Teach, session 3, talking about teach, motivation, engagement, and student ownership. My name is Nicole Dissinger. I began my career in education after earning my bachelor's degree in elementary education from Northern Arizona University with an emphasis in psychology. I later returned to NAU to complete my master's degree in early childhood education with a bilingual multicultural endorsement. Over the past 18 years, I've had the opportunity to teach in a variety of settings around the world, including Flagstaff, Arizona, Kiev, Ukraine, Singapore, and Kona, Hawaii. Through these experiences, I've worked with a wide range of students and school communities. Currently, I work as a mentor, instructional coach, and professional learning facilitator. I mentor first-year teachers through the AZ K-12 Center and support educators through coaching and professional learning with Plan Z and the IB.
Hello, I'm Tammy Musiowsky, founder of Plan Z Education Services. I began my teaching career in Edmonton, Canada, where I taught elementary grades. From there, I moved to New York City, where I spent 8 years teaching and also worked as a pre-K coordinator. After that, I had the opportunity to teach internationally in Singapore. Following my time in the classroom, I transitioned into coaching and professional learning and later served as a director of teaching and learning in Kona, Hawaii. Currently, I partner with the Arizona K-12 Center to mentor teachers in Arizona, and through Plan Z, I provide coaching and professional learning for teachers and school leaders. Before we start, we want you to know that as a participant of these learning sessions, at our in-person day in September, you'll receive a card deck of tips and examples that we will be sharing throughout this series. By the end of this series, you will be able to establish clear classroom routines and structures that support smooth transitions, maximize instructional time, and reduce daily decision fatigue. Apply core teaching values to everyday decisions, ensuring that planning, management, and instruction remain focused on student learning, relationships, and equity. You'll also create a positive, consistent classroom culture where student expectations are clear and students feel a sense of belonging and learning behaviors are explicitly taught and reinforced. And finally, you'll prioritize high impact practices over perfection, using a simplified approach to planning and classroom management that supports sustainability, confidence, and long-term growth.
All right, so welcome back to our Ready, Set, Teach series. In our first session, Ready, we explored the foundation of classroom culture by reflecting on our teaching values and the skills students need to thrive in our classrooms. In session 2, Set, we focused on the structures that support clear expectations, consistent routines, and thoughtful responses to behavior. Today, we move into the final piece of the puzzle. This session is called Teach, because once our values, skills, expectations, and routines are in place, the next question becomes, how do we design learning experiences that truly engage students? And how do we help students feel motivated, curious, and invested in their learning? All right, so welcome back to our Ready, Set, Teach series. In our first session, Ready, we explored the foundation of classroom culture by reflecting on our teaching values and the skills students need to thrive in our classrooms. In session 2, Set, we focused on the structures that support clear expectations, consistent routines, and thoughtful responses to behavior. Today, we move into the final piece of the puzzle. This session is called Teach, because once our values, skills, expectations, and routines are in place, the next question becomes, how do we design learning experiences that truly engage students? And how do we help students feel motivated, curious, and invested in their learning?
When students feel engaged in learning, something powerful happens. Classrooms feel more energized, students participate more actively, behavior challenges often decrease, and learning becomes something that students feel a part of, not something that's just happening around them or to them. But engagement doesn't happen by accident. It grows from intentional instructional choices that help students see the meaning in what they're doing, learning, and understand their role in the learning process. Today, we're going to explore what motivation and engagement really mean and how teachers can cultivate them in practical ways.
Let's start by talking about motivation. When we think about motivated students, we might picture students who are focused, curious, and eager to participate. But motivation isn't just about personality or natural enthusiasm. It's strongly influenced by the learning environment that we create. Students are more likely to feel motivated when they experience three important things. They feel capable of the work they're doing, they see purpose in what they're learning, and they feel some ownership over their learning. So, when those three elements are present, they're much more likely to engage deeply with the material. So, take a moment, think about a time when you felt motivated to learn something. Maybe it was a hobby, a professional skill, or something you were curious about. Chances are you felt a few things. You believed you could improve your practice, you understand why the learning mattered, and you had some choice or control over how you approached it. Students are very similar. When they feel capable, when they understand the purpose, and when they feel like active participants in learning, motivation begins to grow.
On the other hand, motivation tends to drop when students feel the opposite. When learning feels confusing, when they can't see the purpose, or when they feel like they have no voice or role in the process. This doesn't mean that every lesson has to be exciting or entertaining, but it does mean students benefit from understanding what they're learning, why it matters, and how they can engage with the work. So let's just walk through a quick example together. Imagine you're planning a fifth grade math lesson on adding fractions with unlike denominators. This is a required standard. You have to teach it. But how you teach it can make a big difference in how engaged students are. So let's think about how we could design this lesson so students are doing more of the thinking or the heavy lifting while still learning the content. So first, where might students see purpose in this learning? You might start with a real world problem, like if you're combining different amounts in a recipe, how would you add these fractions together? Instead of immediately showing them how to solve it, you could ask, what do you notice? What do you already know that might help you here? Right away, students are thinking and making connections. Next, where might students feel capable of success? You could start by activating what they already know, like adding fractions with the same denominator. Maybe students try a few quick examples on whiteboards or talk through with a partner. Then, instead of explaining every step right away, you might present a problem and ask students to try a strategy, even if it's not a perfect one. After that, you can step into model or clarify, building on what students have already attempted. That way, students are just not just watching, they're contributing to the learning. And finally, where are students actively participating? This is where we really think about the heavy lifting. Instead of doing most of the talking, you might have students work in pairs to solve the problem, ask them to explain their thinking, compare different strategies, or even identify mistakes and have them figure out how to fix them. In this kind of lesson, the teacher is still guiding and supporting, but the students are doing the thinking, the problem solving, and the explaining.
And that's really the shift we're talking about. You're still teaching the standard, you're still responsible for the learning, but instead of carrying all of the cognitive load yourself, you're creating opportunities for students to take on more of that work so that they're more engaged and the learning sticks. So even if you haven't taught this lesson yet, you can start to see how small shifts in planning can create more purpose, more confidence, and more active participation for students.
Let's talk next about engagement. Sometimes we think engagement means students are quiet and paying attention, but engagement is actually much more than that. Engaged students are thinking, They're asking questions, they're discussing ideas, they're trying strategies, they're making connections, and sometimes they're even making mistakes and trying again. In other words, engagement is about active involvement in learning, not compliance.
That's an important distinction. So, a quiet classroom isn't always an engaged classroom. An engaged classroom might include students talking about ideas, working through problems together, asking lots of questions, or even reflecting on their thinking. Engagement often looks like productive activity and curiosity. So instead of only asking, are students on task, we might also ask, are students thinking? Are students participating? Are students interacting with the learning in meaningful ways? There are many ways teachers can encourage engagement through instructional design. So, for example, inviting students to discuss ideas with partners or small groups, asking open ended questions that encourage the thinking, connecting lessons to real world applications, giving students opportunities to explain their thinking, or even incorporating moments of reflection so students can process what they're learning as they're learning it. None of these strategies require dramatic changes to your teaching style. Often they're just small shifts that make learning more interactive.
So let's do a quick reflection prompt. Picture a classroom during a moment when students are deeply engaged. What do you see? What do you hear? How would students be interacting in the learning? Write down a few observations that come to mind. These details can help you design future lessons that encourage those experiences more often.
One of the most important connections that teachers discover over the time is that relationship between engagement and behavior. So when students are meaningfully engaged in learning, many behavior challenges naturally decrease. This doesn't mean engagement eliminates every behavior issue, but it does mean that students are less likely to disengage, disrupt, or distract when they feel invested in what they're doing. So think back to our conversation in session 2 about expectations and routines. Those structures create stability, but engagement brings energy and purpose to the classroom. So when lessons invite participation, discussion, and thinking, students are more likely to feel connected to the learning experience. And when these students feel connected, they're more likely to stay involved. Engagement also strengthens the learning itself. When students explain their thinking, ask the questions, and apply these ideas in different contexts, they develop a deeper understanding of the material we're teaching. Learning becomes more than memorizing information. It becomes a process of growth and exploration. And that's where student ownership begins to develop.
Student ownership is the idea that students see themselves as active participants in their own learning. Instead of relying entirely on the teacher to direct everything, students begin to take responsibility for their progress. This might look like setting goals for improvement, reflecting on their learning, asking questions when something isn't clear, or taking initiative to revise and improve their work. Ownership doesn't appear overnight. It develops gradually as students experience a classroom environment that values effort, curiosity, and growth. Teachers support student ownership in many small ways. For example, inviting students to reflect on what they learned after a lesson, asking students to explain their reasoning, providing opportunities for choice in topics or approaches, or encouraging students to set goals for their own progress. These practices communicate an important message. Learning isn't something being done to students. It's something students are actively part of. And when students feel that sense of ownership, their engagement and motivation often increase.
So let's walk through an example together. Imagine you're planning a middle school ELA lesson where students are reading a short story and identifying the main idea. This is something you need to teach explicitly, but how you design the lesson can really impact how engaged students are. So let's start with how can I make this learning experience more engaging? Instead of starting by explaining the main idea, you might begin with a question like, What do you think the story is really about? You could have students make predictions or share initial thoughts before reading. Right away, students are doing the thinking instead of waiting for you to tell them the answer. Next, where might students have opportunities to think, discuss, or explore ideas? So instead of reading the whole text and then asking questions at the end, you might build in pauses. For example, students read a section and then stop to jot what they think is important. They can turn and talk with a partner or highlight parts of the main text that they think connect to the main idea. This shifts the lesson from listen and respond to think, process, and discuss. And finally, how might I encourage students to take ownership of their learning? This is where we really think about that heavy lifting. Instead of giving students the main idea, you might ask them to develop their own and explain their reasonings. You could have students write their own main idea statement. They could compare it with a partner. They could revise their thinking after their discussion. Now, students are analyzing, explaining, and refining their ideas, not just receiving information. Do you notice that shift here? We're still teaching the same standard. You're still guiding the lesson, but instead of doing what the script tells us and doing most of the talking and thinking, you're creating opportunities for your students to do that work. This is what we mean by students doing the heavy lifting. So if I were writing down one strategy to try, it might be I'm going to pause during reading and add a turn and talk so students can process and explain their thinking before I step in. It's a really small shift, but it increases engagement, it builds understanding, and it gives students more ownership.
As we wrap up this session, let's connect the big ideas for our entire series. In Ready, we explored your teaching values and the skills students need to thrive. In Set, we built structures through expectations, routines, and consistent responses to behavior. And today in Teach, we focused on designing learning experiences that cultivate motivation, engagement, and student ownership. Each of these pieces works together to create a classroom where students feel supported, challenged, and inspired to learn.
When teachers intentionally design their learning environments that value curiosity, participation, and growth, students begin to see themselves not just as learners, but as contributors to the learning and community. That's when classrooms really become places where meaningful learning can truly flourish. So, thank you for being part of our Ready, Set, Teach series. We hope these sessions have helped you reflect on your practice, strengthen your classroom culture, and feel more confident in your work as an educator. Your effort and care makes a lasting difference in the lives of your students.
We look forward to seeing you at session 4, the in-person session at the AZ K-12 Center, where we'll get to meet you in person and we will get to give you those card decks we've been talking about at the start of each session. So we look forward to continuing the learning with you.